The eastern country of Forosa, whose territory extended from the eastern half of the Shaded Woods to the great castle north of the Shrine of Winter, was not only facing a war against its neighbors, but also an internal war against the great soul of the Witch of Chaos, which had been sucking the souls of its land like an envious, parasitic demiurge. Those who aspired to reach the ranks of war priest and sage would embark on a difficult pilgrimage to the distant north as to both strengthen their souls by its curse, which was full of icy demons, and prove their worth upon their return. Eventually, the threat of the old chaos, of the great soul which rested below them, would prove overwhelming, and so they'd be forced to send their strongest warrior along with a company of knights and scholars to the distant north, where they'd build Ilium Lois, a city designed to quell the chaos. Upon arriving at the distant north, the Lion Knight would order the construction of Ilium Lois, a name that is a combination of Ellen, meaning torch, and Louise, meaning renowned warrior. His castle would be built atop the core of the old chaos. As Feroza had fallen, the Lion Knight had been proclaimed King of Ilium Lois. He'd be called the Ivory King, for his iconic armor would be built from the frozen ivory mineral, a product of the chaos, which sucked the heat out of anything it could, exclusive to the White Desert. A residential area for the knights was constructed next, in which they'd begin their training to prepare themselves to fight against the demons. The Ivory King and his forces would meet the demonic creatures, whose heat was sucked from their bodies by the old chaos, giving in to an unnatural coldness. 7 saber-toothed tiger demons reigned supreme over the territory. The king would subjugate each one of them in combat and tame them, keeping them as pets. The creatures became impressed with his might and felt attracted to the warmth of his enormous soul. So, upon their defeat, they'd allow themselves to be domesticated by him. The Ivory King taming the demons he defeated mirrors the story of Flan, Gwyn's firstborn, and his taming of the Stormdrake. Before the king's throne room is a statue of Flan. He is depicted as a gentle shepherd. The king's campaign against the demons took a long time to finish, and throughout it, Ilium Lois also has to contend with the curse. The greedy undead of Ilium Lois, that is, criminals who steal from or murder others, who belonged to the lower classes, would be thrown away in a cave and made to starve away, to the point where they'd have to resort to eating each other. As is the rule in Miyazaki's works, a symbolic punishment was devised for their crimes. The result was the cultivation of a covetous demon. The covetous demons were used as tests of might to the knights, who would be ordered to kill and claim the demon's fermented soul for themselves. The training ritual was also symbolic of the rivalry between Feroza and Yugo, the two neighboring nations used to fight each other in the eastern desert. The covetous demon represents the men of Yugo. In fact, their very leader, Auros, turned into such a monster. He is the boss we face as the Earthen Peak. The greedy undead of Ilium Lois, who belongs to the upper classes, would be turned into mimics. That is, they'd be sealed inside a cursed chest, which would drain their vigor and fuse their flesh with it, turning them into demonic creatures which reflected their covetous nature. The mimics would also inversely be used to guard treasures and to hide secrets by punishing those who attempt to steal them with a fate fitting for a thief. A mechanism was designed to banish away the masses of undead, for the curse was proving to be a great issue for Ilium Lois the more time passed. Those close to Halloween would be taken to the northern frontier and sealed into coffins, which would be thrown down the wall onto a barren stretch of snow that was filled with wild, demonic stallions, and whose limit hosted 2 of the king's pets, Lud and Zalen, who were instructed to grant mercy to the undead who managed to reach that far in their aimless pilgrimage. After finally defeating all the demon kings of the north, the Ivory King wanted to take his army in pilgrimage to the south and reconquer the castle which had belonged to his kingdom as to re-establish Feroza, and after that, he plans to become a true king by linking the fire. But just before that could happen, a woman would appear before him, for she was intuitively attracted to his gleaming soul. Alsana, an ironic name deriving from a combination of Elsa, meaning God is my oath, and Dana, meaning grave or favor. She, like Elena, was a fragment of Manus, the father of the Abyss. She was the incarnation of his fear. The Ivory King would immediately fall in love with her, as the dark presents a powerful temptation to any man. Alsana would propose to the Ivory King a prophesied solution to the old chaos, for she was an oracle, a priest, like Elena. She'd ask of the king to perpetually quell the chaos by feeding it with his kingly soul, along with those of his powerful knights, to forsake martyrdom, his ambition to link the fire, and rule over Ilium Lois for a long, long time, betraying the heavens for the material. Alcana would fund an order of priestesses, and a residential area would be built for them. They'd watch over Ilium Lois with one of Alcana's eyes, which have the special power to see that which is hidden, to see that which the chaos had taken out of view. Each great priestess would inherit the eye and return it upon dying. The priestesses would partake in rituals of appeasing the old chaos, by feeding it with the souls of the warriors of Ilium Lois. The rituals, whose stated goal was to halt the chaos, were only effective to appease it, in the short term. In truth, they served to nurture it in the long term. The rituals also ruined the chances of the king and his knights rebelling, as their souls waned, and the kingdom fell into stagnation and later decayed alongside them. The Abyss and the Chaos share a common goal, which is to restore and prolong the domain of the sun, for one is linked to the other, which is why the demons of Izalith were instructed to oppose the chosen undead in Lordran. They couldn't allow for the fire to be linked, for that would mean the draining of their parasitical sun alongside Gwyn's. Thus, by the time of Dark Souls 3, after the fire had been linked many times, the demons turned to stone. Over time, the king noticed that Elsana's proposal was a Faustian bargain, that the chaos would never be subsumed. Or perhaps he had noticed from the start, but he loved her at first sight and so allowed himself to be fooled. As his power was almost depleted, he'd make his last decree to please his lover, one final time. Alongside his best knights, he'd plunge down into the chaos and sacrifice himself to link it. Before leaving to meet his fate, he'd gift Alsana a sword named after his kingdom, a special weapon that can restore one's life, the opposite of what she has done to him and his kingdom. It was a way of letting her know he was aware of her lies, but still chose to die for her. It was what he had done for her, for the old chaos, for the Abyss. He'd betrayed his cause for love. The Ivory King parallels Artorias, the Abyss Walker. Both were the highest-ranking warriors of their clans, tamed great beasts, who bowed down to them out of their own volition, and were ultimately taken advantage of, for they were too pure and noble-hearted, and deceived into sacrificing themselves for the sake of the Abyss, and both were left-handed. The king's sacrifice emboldened the chaos to the point where it would consume the entirety of Ilium Lois in one fell swoop, turning its inhabitants into demons, freezing each of its buildings, and busting open its gate from the explosive icy winds. An incident that mirrors the ritual that birthed the Bear of Chaos, which resulted in an eruption that consumed Izalith, turning its inhabitants into demons, and spreading lava everywhere. Even though she was an agent of the dark, whose very nature demanded she spread corruption, Alsana would be moved by her king's corrupted sacrifice, which was done out of the profound love he had for her, and come to deeply regret her actions. She'd entrust a champion, a bearer of the curse, with her final wish, to free her king from chaos, and upon granting her the wish, she'd tell him to reach his journey's end, to avoid the temptation of the dark and achieve Gnosis, to become a true king, to link the fire, and realize her lord's original ambition.
I have but one wish. That my dear lord might be freed from that unspeakable chaos. I haven't the strength to help him myself, but perhaps one such as you. Though I am yet to know your name, stranger, will you lend me your strength? Kind visitor, I thank you. Let me open the path to chaos. And please, do all you can. You've granted my one wish. Now, I have no regrets. I was born amidst the dark. Long ago, in the depths of the abyss, my father perished. shattered into tiny pieces, one of which was me. How frightened I was. A frail thing, born from but a splinter of dark. I felt that I might simply disappear. I am, in fact, the incarnation of my father's fears. I saw that the king of this land was strong. I sought him only to sustain myself, to smother my fears. Now, I realize that he may have known all along. I was born of fear, and my Lord provided comfort. And so, here I remain, heiress to my Lord's wishes, watching over chaos. Until the end of time. The knights of Aleum were swallowed by the chaos, where their souls still remain. I pray for their deliverance. I sense a night's joyous elation. Kind visitor, please accept my gratitude.
And this is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. If you want to support my work and get access to a Substack-like blog in which I post in-depth analysis of works of an esoteric nature, ranging from movies to manga to music clips, as well as my insights on philosophy and religion, you can check out my Patreon.